Good morning. I'll start again. Chers collègues, chers amis, bonjour, bienvenue au collège Massey. Sahar mo bekhair wa akhar aghlast, so bekhair wa khosh amadid. Good morning, distinguished guests, dear friends and colleagues, and welcome to Massey College for our conference on empowering Afghan women for global justice. My name is Payam Akhavan, and I am the Massey Chair in Human Rights, and I'm honored to serve as your host today, together with our distinguished principal, Professor James Orbinski. We are joined by an exceptional group of speakers and panelists, both in person and online, and by participants from around the world. And our panelists today are leading the global charge for gender justice in Afghanistan. This conference will explore legal, policy, and advocacy strategies to ensure Afghan women's voices are heard in international proceedings. I will begin this morning with the words of the great poet and Sufi mystic Jalaluddin Rumi, born in the 13th century in the city of Balkh in what is now Afghanistan, and exiled as a child during the Mongol invasions. بشنوین نی چون شکایت می کند از جدایی ها حکایت می کند. Listen to this grieving reed. It tells the story of our separations. Afghanistan, with its rich history and cultural heritage, has become the story of the grieving reed, the story of war and violent persecution, the story of separation in exile, far from one's home, searching for the scattered remains of broken dreams. The persecution of Afghan women and girls by the Taliban is among the most pressing challenges for the international human rights community. Yet in recent times, other than the resistance on the streets of Afghanistan or the secret schools for girls that we have seen as a form of resistance by people on the ground, there have been other signs of hope at the international level. On January 3rd of this year, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants against two top Taliban leaders for the crime against humanity of gender persecution. Some months earlier, on September 25th, 2024, Canada, Australia, Germany, and the Netherlands announced in a joint statement that they've taken formal steps to hold Afghanistan accountable under the 1979 UN Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. It is recognized by the relevant governments and institutions that the active participation of Afghan women is essential for the success of these initiatives. And I note with appreciation the participation in this conference of representatives of the International Criminal Court and of Global Affairs Canada. This conference will explore how such engagement could best enhance the impact of these proceedings on the ground where it matters most. This builds on the previous conference, Silenced Voices, Gender Persecution and Women's Rights in Afghanistan and Iran, organized by the Human Rights Chair on International Women's Day on March 8th, 2024. I note with appreciation the resilient Afghan women's movement and its allies who have been involved in organizing this event, including in particular Naheed, Farid, and Ghizal Haress, and my distinguished colleagues and dear friends, Professor Rangita de Silva de Alwis and Catherine Amirfar, and the other members of the high-level expert group on gender justice. I also note with appreciation the support of the Elahe Omidyar Mir Jalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto, and the assistance of Julian Marley and Sarah Coffard from the law firm of Debevoise and Plimpton in New York, And last but not least, the tireless efforts and dedication of my colleague, Alyssa Ginsberg at Massey College. Alyssa, I just thanked you. You weren't in the room. It was supposed to be for her to be hearing it in the room. So with those introductory remarks, I'm going to begin with some housekeeping before we move to our first panel. You can see that there are programs and QR codes for the program around the room, and you can use those to see the conference details if you wish. We will have our first break after the panel one at 10:50 a.m., although we're running a bit late. And we will have lunch at 12:20 p.m. and a quick changeover between the final two panels. Following the conference, everyone is welcome to attend the networking session. All food and refreshments are offered in the upper library on the other side of the first floor, and washrooms are located near the cloakrooms to the right of the entrance. For those of you joining online, I encourage you to participate by adding questions and comments in the chat. And if you can, please let us know where you're joining us from today. We would also like to inform you that you can post about this event and the important messages you hear today and your reflections on the topics on social media. Please tag at Massey College on Twitter, now called X by a certain gentleman, and at Massey College on Instagram. Make sure to like the videos as you watch and subscribe to the Massey College YouTube channel. Did I do my job well, Principal? Thank you. There we go. Do I get a raise for my... Okay, thank you. Free bagel. So for the folks in the room, each panel will offer time for an audience Q&A at the end, and we will have a microphone in circulation. So please use it so that you can be heard by the audience in the room, and especially by those who join us online. With those brief remarks, I will ask our distinguished principal, Dr. James Orbinski, who assumed his duties just last month, a few weeks ago. And there's much that one can say about our distinguished new principal, who, among many achievements, received in 1999 the Nobel Prize on behalf of Médecins Sans Frontières for the extraordinary work that he and his colleagues have done. I am especially pleased to have you take the floor as a great admirer and a long-time friend. Thank you. Thank you, Farid.
Well, thank you, Payam. My name, as Payam has said, is James Orbinski. I'm the principal here at Massey College, and it's absolutely my pleasure to welcome you. I cannot think of a more important topic or issue that requires deep exploration, and particularly in the very challenging times that we are now in internationally. In my own case, I worked actually in Afghanistan in 1993-94 as a medical doctor with Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders in English. I worked in the Jalalabad region, actually in the Khyber Pass, as a medical director for what was then a newly established refugee camp for about 120,000 people who had fled from Kabul on foot and walked from Kabul to the Peshawar border crossing through the Khyber Pass to the Peshawar border crossing to Pakistan. For the first time in Pakistan's history, it closed the border to Afghan refugees or people seeking refuge. Those people, 120,000, then turned around and walked back through the Khyber Pass to Jalalabad, the city of Jalalabad, to Shura in the city of Jalalabad. In the context of civil war, we're very uncertain about this particular group of people. And then they walked back into the Khyber Pass and found a valley at the base of a series of mountains, which had been a former Russian tank station or battalion base, tank battalion base. It was surrounded by anti-tank landmines. And so you can imagine the circumstances of those 120,000 people. I worked literally at the moment when they were arriving and where the Shura had determined that they were not welcome in the city of Jalalabad. And this was a time where the Taliban were coming to power. There was a deep and highly costly, and I don't mean costly in terms of dollars, I mean in terms of humanitarian impact, highly costly war taking place. And the Taliban were increasingly brutal in their approach to civilians who were non-compliant with their particular approach to things. As a medical doctor, I had to deal with the Taliban, and I had to deal with their imposition of deeply unrealistic constraints on medical practice, and most especially in regard to women. And I witnessed with my own eyes, and I tried to prevent with my own hands, many deaths among women, and most especially among infants during labor and delivery. So I have some deep personal experience, and here we are now, some many years later, and the rights of women under the Taliban have reached new heights of abuse, new heights of neglect. And at the same time, here we are so many years later, and the hope and the aspiration of the international order at that time was such that it led to the creation of the International Criminal Court. Situations of genocide, for example, in Rwanda, in the former Yugoslavia, the tribunals that had taken place in Cambodia had led to an emergent will, a global will, to pursue justice through the creation of appropriate international institutions, one being the International Criminal Court. Here we are now today with a president in the United States, Mr. Trump, who is making every effort to systematically deconstruct the institutional architecture that for many centuries, actually, many human beings have worked very hard to construct. And I'll just remind us here today that the creation of the United Nations in 1945, the creation of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, in 2001, these are actually seminal human achievements. And for the first time, however imperfect these institutions are, and they are imperfect, however imperfect they are, it is the first time in human history that we as human beings have organized ourselves so that we actually have at least a nascent is probably the best word, a nascent architecture for governance, for global governance, and for the pursuit of justice. One of the realities and beauties of Massey College is that it was founded in 1962 with a commitment to the public good and a commitment to cultivating learning, leadership, and civility toward the pursuit of the public good around issues of contemporary concern. Now, the issues that were of concern in 1962 are very different than the issues that are of concern today. One of the beauties of Massey College, and probably its greatest strength, is that it has never lost sight of that core commitment, and it has always adapted to changing political, cultural, and social contexts over that 62-year period from 1962 through to today. Our context has changed today. The International Criminal Court its viability is being challenged. Some of the basic principles of law and some of the basic principles of appropriate adjudication over the allegation of injustice. These are being challenged at their core. The viability of the ICC, for example, as well as the United Nations, this is a question that is in the minds of people like Mr. Trump, who are trying systematically to make it non-viable. The reality of that challenge is a challenge to us. It's a challenge to ensure the relevance of these institutions, the relevance of the laws of war, the relevance of international humanitarian law, and the relevance of truly, profoundly imperfect, but deeply, deeply significant institutions like the International Criminal Court. That is our challenge. And the thematic of the day focus on the injustices that Afghan women face. That's the opportunity to make sure that the very principles of justice, the very practices that we have created to pursue justice, that these remain solid, that they remain viable, and that they actually do, over time, enable actual justice to be achieved. You have 4 fantastic panels: policy engagement and strategies on Canada's role, legal advocacy for Afghan women in international proceedings, which obviously Payam is one of our global experts in, building long-term partnerships for gender justice, and very pragmatically mobilizing resources to move forward. The greatest challenge, I think, in your discussions over the day, for which I wish you great deliberation, great presence of mind, and great openness of mind. The greatest challenge, I think, for you is to find the form of response in relationship to our current geopolitical shifts. How do we pursue justice in the context of what is now occurring at a geopolitical level in terms of the basic institutions that I have referred to? I'm going to close now by just saying that very much in the tradition of Massey College, the core goal is to cultivate learning, leadership, and you are the leaders, and civility. We cannot become what we desire to oppose. We must maintain our civility. We must maintain our inner dignity, and we must see the dignity of the other, of all, including, however difficult it may be to even imagine, including the possibility of dignity among those who now call themselves Taliban members. And so with that, I welcome you. I wish you great deliberations over the day. And I must say that one of our great jewels here at Massey is, in fact, Professor Payam Akhavan. Payam is a global leader in the pursuit of justice for truly some of the most marginalized and oppressed people in the world. And much of what has been accomplished in Canada in terms of policy, in terms of practice, Payam has been at the forefront of that over the last number of years. And he has certainly been at the forefront internationally at the International Criminal Court. And so with that, I turn over the leadership of this particular forum to you, Payam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Principal Orbinski, for those very kind words. I would feign humility, but as Golda Meir famously said, don't be humble, you're not that great. So thank you very much for your very kind words. And we will now proceed to hear from the Deputy Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Najat Shamim Khan. There are two Khans at the court, Karim Khan, the prosecutor, and the Deputy Prosecutor, who's in fact from Fiji. She could unfortunately not join us, but she has kindly prepared a video message. So if we can proceed with that.
On the 5th of March 2020, the Appeals Chamber of the International Criminal Court authorized the prosecutor to commence an investigation into alleged crimes in relation to the situation in the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. On the 23rd of January 2025, the Office of the Prosecutor filed 2 applications for warrants of arrest for the crime against humanity of persecution on gender grounds under Article 7(1)H of the Rome Statute, against the Supreme Leader of the Taliban, Habibullah Akhundzada, and the Chief Justice of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, Abdul Hakim Haqqani. The filings marked a breakthrough in dedicated efforts of the office and its partners to pursue accountability in Afghanistan and to bring the perpetrators to justice. As we continue to work with utmost diligence, collecting further evidence and progressing in relation to our investigative activities in this situation, none of this would have been possible without the remarkable efforts and partnerships we have built with CSOs working in the field, as well as women's group representatives. Your work has been crucial to the success of our joint efforts and the continued progress in the Afghanistan situation. I wish to commend you for your courage, personal commitment, and dedication, particularly as you have been working at great personal risk of retaliation and of persecution. Yet you have braved the obstacles and circumstances and remained dedicated to your mission and commitment to address the heinous crimes committed in Afghanistan through the provisions of the Rome Statute and cooperation with the court. Thank you for your work. Since the commencement of my and Prosecutor Khan's tenure, the office has identified the urgent need to expand partnerships with CSOs across the board as a key priority for the office, including as reflected in the office's strategic plan for 2023 to 2025 and beyond. Progress has been achieved through dedicated efforts aimed at strengthening partnerships with key stakeholders and bringing the office closer to affected communities, where our presence can make a difference, allowing the building of trust and the achievement of tangible outcomes. This important work has further been supported through the office's regular thematic CSO events, nomination of a CSO focal point, extensive consultations with CSOs in relation to thematic policy work, that is children, gender-based crimes, and slavery, as well as the revision and launch of the office's complementarity and cooperation policy last year, which provides an additional pillar to support our work across situations. As Deputy Prosecutor, I oversee the work in relation to the situation in Afghanistan. Our investigation coincided with our policy work on gender persecution, which created space for deep discussions on the crime of persecution on the grounds of gender, and which strengthened our approach in our investigations. Indeed, we continue to face profound challenges: restrictions on access, barriers to reaching witnesses, and a landscape marked by violence, insecurity, and the silencing of those who wish to speak. Yet it is your voices, your networks, and your resilience that help us bridge these gaps. You are our eyes where we cannot see, our ears where we cannot hear, and our strength where hope falters. The applications for the arrest warrants that we have submitted are a testament to this partnership. They reflect evidence gathered despite the odds, evidence of atrocities that demand justice, amplified by your tireless work. This is not just a legal process. It is a moral imperative, a stand against impunity and a recognition of the dignity of every victim, especially women and marginalized communities whose suffering has too often been ignored. The Office of the Prosecutor and all colleagues are committed to deepening this collaboration, safely, ethically, and with respect for your realities. Together, we can ensure that the truth is not buried, that perpetrators are held to account, and that the legacy of this work endures for generations. Your strength fuels our mission. I thank you.
Next, we will hear from three members of the high-level expert group on gender justice, beginning with my distinguished colleague and dear friend, Catherine Amirfar, a partner at Debevoise and Plimpton in New York, and a distinguished practitioner before international courts and tribunals that I've had the great privilege of collaborating with. Catherine.
Thank you very much, dear Payam. It's a pleasure to be here, with you. So I co-chair the Public International Law Group at the International Law Firm of Debevoise and Plimpton. I just recently celebrated 25 years as an international lawyer and have the privilege of working with one of the largest international legal practitioner group in the private sector. And I must say, from the beginning of my privilege in working as a practitioner in international law, one of my missions was to bring private sector resources to human rights challenges globally, because in my view, it's an all tools approach. So I stand here, dear colleagues in Canada, as an American. And these days, I find myself having to say, we stand with you. We're still standing in the United States, and the fight will go on. So we will continue to be there with you, working and collaborating in support of the international order that so many before us worked so hard to establish. So I tell you, as the days get darker, I find myself wearing brighter and brighter colors, and which is really what I'm doing here today. I shudder to think what will happen in the next 4 years to my wardrobe. But we are here in particularly dark times. I remember distinctly standing here over a year ago, speaking then about empowering our Afghan women and girls, bringing those issues to the forefront of the international community and speaking about power and justice. Now, the suffering is extraordinary. It's ongoing. Change is far too incremental to be tolerable. At the same time, we have to seize on the bright moments. And there have been a couple of bright spots in this year. Payam's mentioned the ICC proceedings. We've just heard from the deputy prosecutor. You'll hear about some hero states like Canada who've shown leadership with respect to a potential case in the International Court of Justice. These are steps. They're not sufficient, they're not enough, but they're steps. And I think this morning, I just wanted to I know we have a beautiful program to get to, and I want to get to it, is to make just two brief points. The first is to talk about, and Payam mentioned the high-level expert group on gender justice. There's a lot of groups of international legal lawyers out there. We felt like that, and you'll hear from some of the co-chairs and members, and I want to pay homage to them. But one of the reasons that that group came together was because, notwithstanding these international legal order, international justice mechanisms, the ICJ, the ICC, I have now, in 25 years, I actually counted. When you get old enough, you start to count things. I've been involved in over 100 human rights cases. And in each of those cases, the voices of the survivors were the most important aspects of forming the legal strategy, of understanding what it means to achieve true justice, because it is not a one-size-fits-all, it's bespoke. And the only way to determine and measure true justice in a particular situation is by bringing the voices of survivors into the center. And in my view, that happens really infrequently in international justice initiatives. And one of the things that we're here to talk about today is how to make that meaningful, how to center the voices and hear of the Afghan women and girls into the pursuit of justice. And so you'll see panel after panel coming back to that very basic issue. We have to get past this notion of what I call the photo ops approach to human rights and justice, where a simple photo that shows a diverse array of individuals is sufficient. That's not what we mean about centering the voices of survivors in the pursuit of justice. So that was some of the context to putting together, now over a year ago, the high-level panel, the high-level expert group on gender justice. Payam is a member. I want to pay homage to my co-chairs, Baroness Helena Kennedy of the House of Lords of the United Kingdom, dear Professor and friend Rangita de Silva de Alwis, who you'll hear from in a moment, Associate Dean of International Affairs, Director of the Global Institute of Human Rights at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She's also a member of the on the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. You'll hear from her in a moment. Ghizal Haress, visiting professor at the University of Toronto. We came together as co-chairs and formed this group of 29 international legal experts from across the globe specific to the point of gender justice. It was formed to start with situations of Iran, which is where I hail from, and Afghanistan, but has since expanded to deal with gender justice issues across the world. So you'll also hear from Naheed Farid, who is a former Afghan member of parliament, former chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights, who are also very, very honored to count among our members. So with that, I just want to thank you for braving the snow and getting here. Thanks to everyone. I know there's a lot of people joining us online. I look forward to a really inspiring discussion, and I couldn't feel more privileged than to be here with you in this moment right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for your very thoughtful remarks, and most of all for your commitments. And you've truly been extraordinary with your level of engagement. Next, we go to Ms. Naheed Farid, who Catherine has already introduced, and distinguished a human rights defender from Afghanistan, member of the high-level group, who unfortunately could not be with us today in person, but who has really played a key role in making this conference possible. Naheed Khanum, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Akhavan. I'm so humbled to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Honored officials of the Canada Global Affairs, ICC representatives, distinguished scholars of Massey College, esteemed Afghan women leaders, advocates, members of high-level expert group, ladies and gentlemen, let me first extend my sincere gratitude to Massey College and all amazing organizers that I cannot name because we don't have enough time for hosting this unprecedented, historical, and timely discussion. Your commitment to human rights and global justice is deeply valued at this critical time for Afghan women. I also stand before you today with deep appreciation for Canada's unwavering commitment to human rights, but also with an urgent call to action on behalf of Afghan women. The Taliban's will in Afghanistan is not just oppression. It is gender persecution, and in another level, as all Afghan women are pushing forward, it's gender apartheid. It's a deliberate, systematic erasure of women from society, enforced through violence, through fear, through humiliation, and a complete dismantling of their rights. The International Criminal Court has taken a historical step requesting arrest warrants for Taliban leaders. Simultaneously, Canada, alongside Australia, Germany, and Netherlands, and some other countries, is leading a groundbreaking case at International Criminal Court. The first to challenge a state for gender discrimination under CEDAW. However, these legal actions are not enough. Justice must be enforced. Canada must lead not just in the courtroom, but in diplomacy, ensuring that these cases against the Taliban do not become another stalled legal processes. We need strong political backing that pushes sanctions, asset freeze, travel ban, isolation of those enforcing gender apartheid, and we need firm advocacy at every global platform leading by countries like Canada. Afghan women refuse to be silent, we refuse to be erased, we refuse to accept a world where gender apartheid is normalized, and today we urge Canada to be the champion of this fight, to ensure that justice is not only pursued but delivered. As South African civil rights leader Desmond Tutu mentioned and reminded us during his fight, it means a great deal to those who are oppressed to know that they are not alone. I hope Canada government, ICC, ICJ, you as defenders of Afghan women's rights, whether you are from Afghanistan or from outside Afghanistan, let Afghan women know that they are not alone at this greatest time of their need. The women of Afghanistan have been stripped of their rights, silenced in their own land, but we refuse to be erased. Our voices will rise louder than the Taliban's oppression. And with your commitment, the world will have no choice but to listen. Thank you everyone for joining this conference. I'm looking forward to an unprecedented historical conference and inspirational speeches of my fellow Afghan leaders to inspire the world to move forward supporting Afghan women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naheed Khanum, for your remarks. We wish you could join us in person, but we are grateful for your contributions. Last, but certainly not least, I would like to call upon my distinguished colleague and dear sister, Professor Rangita de Silva de Alwis, whom Catherine has already introduced. She is not only a distinguished scholar, professor at the University of Pennsylvania, outstanding member of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, but someone who has played an absolutely key, if not sacrificial role in making the high-level group possible and in her engagement with the women of Afghanistan. Rangita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Akhavan. Today I come before you as a co-chair of the high-level expert group on gender justice that Catherine Baroness Kennedy Ghizal and I co-chair. I am deeply sorry that I cannot be there with you in person as I'm currently leading the CEDAW Committee's independent communications. I congratulate the principal of Massey College and Professor Akhavan for their extraordinary leadership in the pursuit of the public good and in amplifying civil discourse. Although first envisioned, like many other great universities, as a college for men, in opening Massey College's doors for women in the 1970s, the Massey family, the biggest champions of admitting women to the college, stated clearly, the coexistence of women and men has benefited the human race. Half a century later, Massey College is helping to combat the systemic segregation of women and men in Afghanistan in public and in private life, and the gross violations of women's rights to education. As a CEDAW committee member, I congratulate Canada on leading the efforts to hold the Taliban accountable for violations of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the committee on which I sit. Against the backdrop of unfolding history, the high-level expert group on gender justice stands with our Afghan sisters to contribute to this epochal international justice proceedings. The high-level expert group also congratulates Canada for its globally admired feminist foreign policy. Canada's policy underscores the importance of human dignity at a time when conflicts are multiplying and humanitarian principles, international law and human rights, multilateralism, and the very rules-based global order are increasingly under threat, under attack. The principle of dignity, which was given primacy by the principle of Massey College. The dignity principle is drawn from the UDHR's, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, own inalienable guarantee that all persons are born equal in dignity and in rights. And that is what will animate our discussions today. Finally, this is a moment in time that calls for allyship. As the principal himself noted, and allyship comes both in personal and political forms. The term allyship itself is rooted in a history of international relations and crystallized as built on the universal bedrock guarantees of dignity and of allyship. We will hear more about the need to amplify voices of the global South. An enduring voice from the South, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Afghanistan's neighbor, Pakistan, said in another college and at another time, at the Islamia College of Women, no nation can ever be worthy of its existence that cannot take its women along with its men. Afghanistan cannot be worthy of its existence without its women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Da Silva, and thank you to all of our exceptional opening speakers for these insightful remarks. We will now transition into the first panel discussion, and we're running slightly late. We Iranians say we have 2,500 years civilization, but we're always half an hour late, so I'm keeping consistent with my cultural tradition. So the first panel will be partially online, but it will be mostly in camera. I say this for our colleagues who are joining us online. And for the second part of this panel, we will use Chatham House rules. So not only will it not be broadcasted, but I ask those who are in the room not to post any statements on social media that would be attributing statements to particular individuals. And we are very grateful to our colleagues from Global Affairs Canada that they've made the trip here from Ottawa. And I'm sure that discussion will be particularly useful. So I will now have the great pleasure of introducing the first moderator of the first panel, Ghizal Haress, who you've already heard about. She's a constitutional lawyer and scholar dedicated to constitutionalism, the rule of law, and institutional accountability. She was Afghanistan's first Ombudsperson on human rights. She led high-level corruption investigations and served as commissioner for the Afghanistan Independent Commission on overseeing the implementation of the Constitution. She's a visiting professor at Osgoode Hall Law School, an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto, program director for the Afghan Women's Fellowship Program at Massey College. Her research focuses on legal pluralism, constitution building, and post-conflict governance. Ghizal holds an LLM from SOAS, University of London, and she is simply outstanding. Ghizal, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It is really a pleasure to be here today and to be moderating the first panel for this conference. I would like to request Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Ali Ehsasi, to join me here on the panel. And I believe our second panelist, Ms. Mariam Munsif, is joining us online. Ms. Munsif online?
Yes, hello, good morning.
Good morning. Okay, so today's first panel is going to focus on Canada's role in advancing upon women's role in achieving global justice and accountability. And as Professor Akhavan said, we'll have a discussion and then an open discussion and then following by another discussion under Chatham House rules. We all know what's happening in Afghanistan today, and Afghan women who were once key players in their country's progress have been systematically erased of public life since the Taliban's takeover in 2021. They have been stripped of their most basic rights, such as education, employment, freedom of movement, access to justice, and all of these amount to what we know as gender apartheid. Although when I think of gender apartheid, when I think of the word apartheid, I think of South Africa, we all do. And then what is this distinct between Afghanistan and South Africa is in South Africa, it was a question of segregation and separation. While when we talk about apartheid in Afghanistan, we're talking about gender apartheid, which means complete exclusion and deprivation of rights. So there is a stark difference in distinction. And it's the worst form of apartheid that we have experienced. And these restrictions have not only been individual violations, but a regime-enforced policy to erase women of public and personal life and also depriving them of agency and autonomy. There have been hundreds of decrees that have banned women from receiving, from accessing their rights. And despite all of these grim realities, Afghan women have not just been silent victims. They have rather shown unwavering resilience. They have made persistent efforts to resist this oppression and advocated for their rights, whether they are within the country or in exile. However, Afghan women, despite these threats of imprisonment, even exile, they continue to raise their voices in international platforms, ensuring that the world does not forget their struggle. But it's important to note, that Afghan women have not been alone in this fight. Our international colleagues and partners have stood firmly beside us, amplifying our voices, advocating for our rights, and providing critical support in the face of this oppression. This solidarity has been a source of strength, proving that the fight for Afghan women's rights is not confined within the country's borders, but it's a global movement demanding justice, inclusion, and lasting change for women's rights. Despite the global outrage, the Taliban have remained defiant, justifying their measures under the pretext of religion and culture, religious values and cultural norms. And with diplomatic avenues exhausted and repression intensifying, the move to bring the Taliban policies before the International Court of Justice has been a crucial step in fight against the oppression of women's rights. For the first time, a state is being challenged at the world's highest court for violation of Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. Today's discussion is about ensuring that Afghan women's voices are not just heard, but they shape policy and legal responses at the highest level. Canada has taken a leading role in pursuing international legal accountability, including through the ICJ case. However, legal processes are only as strong as the strategies behind them. How do we ensure these cases move forward effectively? What role can Afghan women play in shaping these efforts? And what policy tools beyond litigation must be deployed to create lasting impact? This panel is not just about discussing challenges, it's about discussing solutions. How can Canada's foreign policy go beyond legal action to deliver meaningful change? How do we ensure Afghan women are not just subject of international litigation, but active participants in shaping justice? To help us navigate these pressing questions, we have an esteemed panel with deep expertise in international law policy and advocacy joining us here today. I would like to start with Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Ali Ehsassi. Mr. Ali Ehsassi represents the Toronto riding of Willowdale. He is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and member of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. He brings extensive policy experience to discussions on Canada's role in supporting Afghan women. With a background in law and public service, at provincial and federal levels, he understands the intricacies of government action, holding degrees from University of Toronto, London School of Economics, Osgoode Hall Law School, and Georgetown University. Mr. Essasi combines academic rigor with practical expertise. He's an advocate for housing, affordability, human rights, and social justice. Thank you for being here with us, Mr. Essasi. We also have with us today Ms. Mariam Monsef. I think we all here know who Ms. Mariam Monsef is. Ms. Mariam Monsef is a former Canadian cabinet member and the current CEO of Onwards. She is the founder and CEO of Onwards and an acclaimed international speaker, facilitator, and strategic advisor, a lifelong advocate for women's empowerment. She inspires audience with practical tools to thrive in all aspects of life. As a former Minister for Women and Gender Equality, Mariam advanced transformative policies, earning recognition as a global influencer on gender equality and by apolitical. Balancing her professional achievements with motherhood, she's passionate about fostering a world where women and their families thrive. We're very happy to have you here with us, Ms. Monsef. Mr. Essasi, I would like to start with you and would like to ask, knowing that you are active in Canada, I would like to ask you, what measures can the Canadian Parliament and the Canadian government take to ensure sustained advocacy for Afghan women's rights at the international level?
First of all, good morning. It's great to be back here at Massey College. I wanted to start off by thanking you. Thanking you, Professor Harris, thanking you, Professor Akhavan, and also thanking Massey College and Principal Orbinski for doing this once again. The fact that you have been at the forefront of keeping our attention sustained on Afghanistan is very, very important. But I think part of the reason why it is so important what you are doing, and other institutions should be joining you in this effort, is for several reasons. I think we are truly, truly blessed with an incredibly impressive Afghan community here in Canada. People like yourself and others in the audience who have really been at the forefront of social developments in Afghanistan. In addition to that, let's also remember that thousands of Canadian men and women in uniform served in Afghanistan. So that living memory is also something that is very, very important in terms of ensuring that we maintain momentum in focusing our attention on Afghanistan and drawing on everyone's expertise. By way of example, I would say it might come of interest to everyone here that currently in the House of Commons, we have a member of Parliament who had served in Afghanistan, and that is also true of our Senate as well. So it's important to recognize all these various indicators and all of the talent we have in our country to make sure that Canada remains at the forefront. Of course, my dear friend and fellow panelist here, Minister Monsef, obviously, during the period she was in Ottawa, was a source of great leadership on the issue of Afghanistan. But that in itself is not enough. I think Canada is doing its part. We're very much engaged. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Joly, is engaged. We have a special envoy to Doha, Ambassador Sproul. So we are engaged, and we're doing many things across various platforms. And we have always ensured that in various fora, whether it be the G7, whether it be other fora, that we're at the forefront mentioning Afghanistan and reminding the world that given the unconscionable things that are happening in Afghanistan, we have to continue the momentum. Of course, given the expertise of people who are here, along with 3 other countries, we did initiate proceedings at the International Court of Justice. We also heard how things are moving forward with the ICC. But I think given our particular expertise as a country on Afghan issues, it's really, really important if there is a challenge, and Principal Orbinski actually referred to this, it's the matter of will, creating that global will to make sure that everyone remains focused. To date, I would say that the efforts of various countries are very, very important, but they're not necessarily coordinated. So we have to do a much better job making sure that various countries in Europe and countries in North America, to the extent possible, are better coordinated to make sure that these cases move forward, but also make sure that we are focused on the expertise of Afghan women and indeed all Afghans in making sure that the momentum is maintained.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Essasi, for all your efforts, all the wonderful work you're doing, and all of us in Canada are a witness to that. I would like to ask a question from Ms. Munsif. Minister Munsif, you have been in the Canadian government and also served as a minister on gender equality and women. So what lessons can be learned from Canada's past engagements in Afghanistan, particularly supporting women's rights and governance? And what lessons can we learn from that to apply to the current situation in Canada's support to Afghanistan?
Well, thank you so much for that thoughtful question, and to everyone at Massey College for convening this important conversation. It's great to see MP Ali Essasi, our chair for Foreign Affairs, and of course to see through my camera the amazing Naheed Farid, who's joining us from the US. I am so grateful to Afghan women who bravely continue to advocate for those who don't have a voice, those who do feel and are being erased. And so thankful to our allies. And we heard from a few, right? The ICCP, the ICJ, folks like Ms. Amirfar, who are relentless about pursuing justice and amplifying the voices of Afghan women. Without you, it is going to be a very lonely fight for Afghans, and we are just so grateful for you. I'm joining you from my home in Peterborough, a very snowy day. My house is a mess. There's people coming to my door. It's election day in Ontario, so people are trying to get out the vote. But this conversation is so incredibly important. So I would say my advice will be divided into three parts. First of all, around the current political context and where things are going. Second, advice on advocacy. And third, and Ms. Amirfar mentioned this, the importance of centering the voices of survivors. We talk about it. It's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. It's the effective thing to do. But to actually do it, I've been in meetings where Afghan women are the last to speak, even though the meeting is about Afghan women. And they're the last to speak after we've run out of time, because these meetings always go over time. I've stopped working with those organizations because despite conversations to stop doing that, they don't seem to give space for Afghan women, but there's a conversation to be had here. First of all, on the political context, we are days away from choosing a new Liberal leader here in Canada, who will be our new Prime Minister, and probably weeks away from a federal election. We have an election happening here in Ontario, of course. Elections in many provinces have already happened. And we recently saw the inauguration of Mr. Trump, the same individual who negotiated the so-called peace deal for Afghans without Afghan women at the table. So the world has changed and the political context will continue to shift. And you can be sure that when there is instability and uncertainty, when people are worried about their economic security and their own well-being, and these days in Canada, their sovereignty, we go into survival mode as humans. And so issues like foreign affairs, like immigration, like bringing in more refugees and supporting them things like something I'm very proud of, the Feminist International Assistance Policy, are gone. Unless, as MP Esasi said, there's a government in place that cares about that. And we know that the opposing party, the Conservatives, have been very clear about how they feel about feminist anything and woke anything. So this is the political context in which we live. We as Afghan women and allies have to work that much harder in a place that so far has been a champion for, 50,000+ Afghan refugees came to Canada, the work that Melanie Jolie's been doing, the work that the armed forces and our veterans who've returned have been doing. All of that is at risk of being diminished moving forward. So that's first. And by the way, you can be sure that immigrants and things like Feminist International Assistance Policy, rather than be elevated and strengthened at a time we need them to, are actually going to be scapegoated. That's not good news, but it's just the reality that I know you all know we're in. As far as advocacy in these times goes, you, particularly Afghan women like Naheed, Farid, and those in the room know best, out of sight means out of mind. And the Taliban, of course, have been and are continuing to count on this. The less we hear from Afghan women, the less attention paid to them. There's so much happening in the world that no one's going to say, oh, wait, what happened to Afghan women? Unless Afghan women and their allies continue to rise and elevate voices that are at risk of being forgotten. The key to the advocacy in this context is consistency and professionalization. Consistency both in how often Afghan women and their allies are speaking to decision makers, not just when a crisis happens, but weekly, monthly, and consistency also in messaging. Politicians who don't have that will that MP Esasi talked about, who don't really want to help, but will be polite and listen to you because it's politically bad for them not to make the time for you, they love nothing more than saying there was no consensus amongst Afghan women, therefore we're going to wait until they agree on what they want, and then we will step in. Consistency in messaging requires consensus building and more support and healing within Afghan women, and I will get back to that shortly. Professionalizing advocacy means coordinating the collective voices so that whether you're speaking to folks in Canada or in the US or in Europe or in Australia or New Zealand, that everybody is doing it around the same time with the same key messages, and that relationships are being built to help pursue the goals of Afghan women. I think a success there has been the work that folks like Naheed Farid have been doing around recognizing what's happening in Afghanistan to Afghan women as gender apartheid. That was a beautiful example of everybody coming together across their diversities and saying, this is our #1 priority, and it worked. It worked. We're talking about it, and our wonderful moderator spoke about it in the opening statement, and we need more of that. Lastly, and probably most importantly, centering the voices of survivors. There is a need to recognize that the brave Afghan women leaders we see speaking on TV, on international panels, gatherings like this today, to parliamentarians and other decision makers, they're doing it at a cost. Often, many of them are new to the place that they have sought refuge, whether it's Canada, US, or otherwise. So they're going through the normal immigrant integration cycle. They're far away from their loved ones, and they have that immigrant guilt that you survived, you escaped, now you need to help us. Often they have care responsibilities for their elders and their children. They're also often the sole breadwinner and the one with the best language capabilities. So they have the responsibilities to navigate the system and to be the moms and the matriarchs of their families. And we risk greatly burning these incredible women out. And so their responsibilities, we need to support them with. First of all, we need to take care of them with economic security. I'm pretty sure that many of the government supports we put in place when I was in office have run out. So Ms. Amirfar spoke about the private sector stepping in and being a great support. I agree wholeheartedly. We need supports from post-secondary institutions to provide fellowships for these brave Afghan women leaders. We need the private sector to create opportunities for them so that they can provide support and financial security to their families so they can do the work of advocacy, which is unpaid work on behalf of all of us. There's a lot of trauma that has been endured. There's a lot of trauma that has not been healed. And providing these women, Farid, for example, she's on her way, there's snow, so she's on her way to this event right now, tells me that there is free mental health supports for Afghan refugees here in Canada. To address the trauma that Afghan women continue to bear is to also address, frankly, because this is Chatham House rule, some of the horizontal violence that happens. The belief that there's not enough room for all Afghan women can sometimes lead to Afghan women themselves not agreeing with one another, which is totally normal. But that lack of consensus and that disagreement is taken advantage of by those who don't actually want to be helpful. So addressing the trauma is key both for personal and for advocacy reasons. Second, it's time to join hands. Guess who else is having a peace deal negotiated on their behalf without being at the table? The Ukrainians. Guess who else in Canada has been subject to violence and all sorts of gender injustice, including genocide? Indigenous women. Finding these allies and joining forces with them will only help elevate the message and the experiences of Afghan women. I sincerely believe, as I know you do, that what happened and what is happening to Afghan women today is a canary in the coal mine for the status of women everywhere. If a group of thugs can walk into a state capital and topple a democratically elected government in one corner of the world, they can do it anywhere in the world, especially when they've been able to do so with impunity. Lastly, it's time to include young people like IEDI is a great organization here in Canada in these conversations. They know how to advocate professionally. It's time for Afghan men to step up even more. As long as Afghan men themselves are quiet, Afghan women are never, ever going to be able to seek justice. We need more Afghan men to support Afghan women leaders. We need more Afghan men to call out the injustices. We need more Afghan men to call out governments who are forgetting or choosing to turn away from the plight of Afghan women. Because as long as our own men don't care, why should foreign governments? There's an opportunity too in this current context to further enhance our relationship with our US counterparts. And I truly hope to see more of that. I want to be a part of that. And so I know I've spoken a lot, but I just had to get all of this out before my doorbell rings or something goes wrong with my connection on this snowy day.
Thank you so much, Minister Munsif. Thank you for reminding us that in a changing world, given what's happening in the US and what might be happening in Canada, how important it is for us to keep our alliance and to make sure we continue our efforts to fight for the rights of women. I'll turn back to Honorable SLC. I wanted to ask, what policy tools does Canada have at its disposal? We know the litigation is already going on, but what other policy tools are there to ensure that Afghan women remain at the center of international discussions when we talk about Afghanistan? And you talked about Canada's influence in multilateral institutions like the UN. You talked about G7. And what role can Canada play? How can Canada influence these platforms to ensure that women's rights in this very challenging world where the priorities are completely different now, how can we ensure that Afghan women's rights remain a priority?
Absolutely. Great question. let me just cite a few of the examples of how Canada has remained engaged on the Afghan issue. First of all, as you know, Canada is providing humanitarian assistance, given the fact that we do not have official channels or diplomatic relations with Afghanistan. All of the aid that we have provided so far has been through multilateral channels. In addition to that, as you rightly pointed out, we are also making sure that in various international fora, the issue of Afghanistan does come up. So international fora, the obvious ones that do come to mind are obviously the G7, the G20, at the United Nations. But also, just to give you the latest example, as you know, Minister Joly just approximately, I would say 10 days ago, actually did convene a number of women foreign ministers to also talk about Afghanistan. That particular initiative, as I understand, had approximately 50 countries participating. So when I say it's important to maintain that momentum, that's what I mean. If countries such as Canada or other allies don't repeatedly bring up the question of Afghanistan, and of course we are living in a climate where there are a multiplicity of challenges. So all the more important that given the egregious things that are happening in Afghanistan, that you do have countries like Canada, you do have countries like Norway or the Netherlands who constantly do bring up Afghanistan. Another issue I wanted to speak to is the Afghan community here in Canada has been incredibly engaged and energetic. Just to give you one example of that, over the course of the past 4 years, past year, I should say, Afghan women have been in Ottawa on 4 separate occasions, making sure that they are meeting with senators, they are meeting with ministers, and they are meeting with MPs. So that is a remarkable record. It is so good to see how engaged Afghan women are. But I also see it in other fora as well. For example, last week I was in Munich, and of course Ms. Kufi, who's well known to everyone here, she was there as well, doing a superb job. So it's important to recognize all the incredible efforts that are going on, but making sure that we are at our best, harnessing the expertise that Afghan women and indeed all Afghans in the US, in Canada, and Europe bring to the task at hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Haress, for the assurance that Afghanistan remains one of the discussion points for Canada at international forums. In the benefit of the time, we would like to close our open panel, our open session now, and would like to introduce our 2 other panelists. And just a reminder, they would be talking under the Chatham House rules. We would request all our guests not to attribute any comments to our speakers from now onwards. The 2 colleagues that are joining us here today from Global Affairs Canada, I have Ms. Neil Stewart,